So it's time to start making the cabinets. I got some maple veneer plywood to make the basic boxes for the cabinets. Now I'm going to start by making the bottoms to all of the cabinets. That'll let me fit the bottoms in place and make sure that the cabinets are going to fit in the space of the kitchen. Now for the cabinets that are going to be drawers, I made the bottom as a frame. This is because the bottom really isn't needed because there'll be a drawer there. So you'll never really see this hole when you're using the kitchen. And this will let me use less material for the cabinet. It'll make the cabinet lighter. It'll make it a little easier to work with because I'll have a handle at the bottom. And what it'll do is it'll allow me to have access into the base below the cabinet because I'm going to have a lot of wiring and plumbing down there. So it would be nice to be able to get into that space in a few spots. So the frames are just jointed at the corners with a biscuit, and that should work. And I made them a little bit big, so once they're done, I can cut them down to size, and they'll be perfect at that point. And the next thing to make are the sides, or the vertical parts of the cabinets. And I cut down 2 4x8 sheets, and I got 2 pieces that were the height that all of the cabinets will be, which is about 2'7", which is longer than half the width of a 4x8 sheet. So what that meant is I ended up with 2 shorter sections, and what I decided I could do is put those together to get a third panel to cut out the sides that I needed. Those would have a seam in them, but it's not really that big a deal. It'll save me a lot of plywood to get a little more material out of the sheets that I had. And I thought about gluing it back together as an 8-foot long sheet, but the joint wasn't very tight because it's hard to keep a really straight line over 8 feet. So I cut the pieces closer to the length I would need for the sides of the cabinets and then glued those together. And the joints were much better doing it that way. Then once those were dried, I could then cut those to the final width. Now the widths of the various cabinets vary a little bit, so they're not all exactly the same width, but they're pretty close. Now the other thing I wanted to do was to make the edging for the plywood where you'd see the edge. So I got a piece of maple and I planed that to the thickness of the plywood, and then from there I could cut it into strips which could then be glued to the edge of the plywood. I've done this where I do this part after the box is together, and I think it's a little easier to do it this way where you put the edge on before you put the box together, because then as you're cutting the final sizes for the pieces of the box, you're also cutting the edging, so you're not trying to fit the edging perfectly to the box once it's put together. So I just glue this on and then some pin nails to hold it in place. And the pin nails are really small, so you don't really see them on the face of the edging. And this edging will be behind the drawer faces and the doors, so it shouldn't take a whole lot of abuse. It doesn't really need to be connected super well to the plywood. Now I wanted to put a dado into the bottom pieces to receive the sides of the cabinets. Mostly just so the sides will sort of have a place to go as I'm putting the cabinets together. And it's pretty easy to do. Now one of the boxes is going to have 2 banks of drawers, and I wanted to have the drawers on each side to be exactly the same width, so it wouldn't be fiddling around with different size drawers. So I centered a dado on that bottom. Then the last major part to make were the backs to the cabinets, and that was going to be with 1/2-inch birch plywood. They didn't have 1/2-inch maple plywood, so I got the birch, which looks almost exactly the same. So it was basically the same thing where I cut the height, because that was going to be the same for all the cabinets, and then cut each width for each cabinet. And then it was finally time to start putting all the pieces together. I started by attaching the sides to the bottom and then putting the back on to kind of hold it rigid. And I like to do glue and then nails to sort of hold the piece together, then come back with screws and really make it much stronger. I think this was the way Norm used to do it on his show. That's the way that I've learned to do it. And this went fairly fast. It was a little slower than I thought, but things went together. The second box I made was the corner, which is a little bit more complicated because it wasn't a simple depth. It had more of a three-dimensional shape or sizing to it. So you couldn't really lay it flat on one side and work on it. And then the boss came in to check things out. Things were fine. And I worked on the box under the sink, which for now is just a simple box, but it's going to have a lot more to it, like the structure to hold up the sink. And then there's going to be a little bit on one side. The cabinet's going to kind of go behind where the door is. I guess once I make it, we'll see what that looks like. But it's going to be more than just a simple box. Then the box next to the stove. And then there's going to be a long, deep box in the other corner that's going to have drawers that'll face the dining room. And there'll be really deep drawers that'll get into that corner. So it's the space next to the sink, but it'll actually face the dining room. And then everyone came out to inspect, and things look good. So those are the boxes for the cabinet. So I hope next will be drawers, and then the facing on the drawers. And then once that's all together, I can then take everything up and install it in the kitchen. Thanks for watching.